So back in our code, again, I got two windows, one for the backend and one for the front end. You can see it on the top left corner. And I want to start on the backend. There, I want to start by ensuring that we are generating such a token. But actually, I want to start one step earlier when a new user signs up, when we create a new user. Right now, we always store the password as plain text in the database. And thus far, this was okay because we had no real authentication anyways. But now I want to change that because we never, ever should store passwords as plain text in the database. Why? Well, if our database gets compromised by an intruder or by an employee who isn't happy, so if someone gets access to our database and is able to extract data from there, if the password is stored in plain text, this attacker has everything, all the information it needs. If the password instead is encrypted, so if it's a string which can't be decomposed to the original password, then the attacker might still have the email and the name, which is bad enough, but at least the attacker doesn't have the valid password. So the data which can be extracted is less useful. Therefore, we don't want to store the password like this, but instead encrypt it, hash it before we store it. And for that, we can install a third-party library with npm install --save, and the name of that library is bcrypt.js. This is a Node.js library that helps us create secure passwords, or not create passwords, but hash passwords, which means encrypt them, convert them to an unreadable string or to a string which can't be reverse engineered, to be precise. So with that installed, we can rerun npm start, and now in the user's controller, I want to import this library. So there I will import bcrypt by requiring bcrypt.js like this. This library now helps us with hashing passwords. So in the create user function, in the signup function here, therefore, we first of all still check if we have a user, that's fine. But if we come to the conclusion that we can create a new user, I don't want to create this password, but instead, as I said, such a hashed password. Now to generate this, we can call bcrypt, and then there we have a hash method. To the hash method, we pass in the password we want to hash, and that is the password we're extracting from the incoming request, so the plain text password. A little side note, by the way, of course, data between the frontend and the server should be exchanged via HTTPS, but that is something which you don't control here in this controller or on the frontend, but in the end, with the service you use for hosting your application. So I assume that this is the case in production. By the time we receive the password on the server side, we of course automatically unpack it back to plain text, but ideally it was transmitted via HTTPS. So once we got the password here, we pass it to hash, and then hash also takes a second argument, which is the so-called salt, or the number of salting rounds. Now here 12 is a good value, and this simply influences the strength of the hash and how easy or hard it is to reverse engineer it. And with 12 salting rounds, we should have a hash which can't be reverse engineered and which still doesn't take hours to generate. Now hash then returns a promise. So since we're already in an async function here, thanks to async in front of our function parameters, we can of course await this generation, and the result will be the hashed password here. Now of course, as always, this could fail. It shouldn't, but it could, so let's wrap it with try catch and catch any potential errors here. And if we got an error here, well then I will create a new HTTP error and say could not create user, please try again, and send back a 500 status code, because this then is some kind of technical server-side error. And then we can return this error with next here as we did it before. So normally we should make it past this try catch block though, and then we have a hashed password. Now when we create a new user, we set the password key, the password property of that user object, to that hashed password now. And we don't store the plain text password therefore, but the hashed password. Now, with that, we store this hashed password. But of course, the next question is, how do we identify the user by the password then? Because comparing passwords like this won't work anymore. After all, in the database, we won't have the plain text password, so we can't compare it to the password entered by the user. And if we did this, if we're sure that we have the right password, how do we generate this token? These are the next questions we have to take care of.